Hi, I'm Ashley McCord and welcome to the Bread Beckers. Today we're going to be talking about troubleshooting with your Zojirushi bread machine using the homemade cycle. We're going to go over probably the most common troubleshooting questions that we receive here at the Bread Beckers. Probably the number one troubleshooting question that we get in regards to making your own bread in this bread machine is my bread is rising beautifully and then it's falling and collapsing in the middle. The first thing you want to look at is your second rise time using the homemade cycle. Typically, bread when it rises and then falls in the middle, it's a sign that it's rising too long before it kicks into bake. And so you might need to just adjust and reduce that second rise time. I would start with just reducing it by 5-minute increments and see if that helps. That's also a very common question even when baking in the oven, that my bread is rising beautifully, I go to put it in the oven to bake and it falls when I put it in there. Just put it in the oven a little bit sooner and that should solve that problem. The other common question that we get about the Zojirushi is my loaf is higher on one side and shorter on the other. It's an uneven loaf of bread. And also the other question in regards to that is it's not smooth on top. It's very lumpy looking, uneven looking. This is typically a sign that your dough is too stiff and you just want to reduce your flour by about 1/4 cup. Now, the amount of flour used in a loaf of bread can change on a daily basis in regards to what is the weather like outside. Is it very moist? Is it humid? Is there a lot of moisture in the air? Typically on those types of days, you'll need the full 4.5 cups of flour that we recommend using in the basic dough recipe found in the Bread Beckers recipe collection. But if it's a very dry day, you may just cut back by about 1/4 cup on that flour, and that should relieve that very uneven look of the bread and it being so stiff that it rises and collects on one side of the pan, and therefore you have higher on one side and lower on the other. So just reduce that flour by a little bit on really dry days and that should fix that problem. The next common question that we have is my loaf isn't rising very tall at all. I've got it set at the recommended rise time and the loaf isn't going over the top of the pan, it's staying very short. The first thing you want to look at is there's a possibility your yeast is bad. Yeast that you purchase from us needs to be kept in the refrigerator or the freezer once it's opened. You don't want to let it come to room temperature at all. It'll start slowly dying if that happens. So you just need to check your yeast. What's the expiration date on it? Have you been keeping it in your cupboard? It's possibly gone bad. So that's the first thing you want to look at. The next is your bread machine might be in a very cold area of your house. Do you have an air conditioning vent that sits right next to it or right above it and blows on it? So you can move the Zojirushi maybe to a warmer part of your kitchen. You can also try increasing the second rise time. That's that rise right before it starts baking. And so just increase it. Start at 5-minute increments and see if that helps. Also, you want to make sure that your salt is down in your liquids, down in the water, and your yeast, you're putting it on top of the flour. Yeast and salt don't really like each other very much, and so your salt can actually kill the yeast if you're mixing them in at the same time. So salt in the water, yeast on top of the flour. If these things still don't work and you're still not getting as high a rise, you can increase the amount of yeast called for in the recipe. Our typical recipe calls for 1 tablespoon of yeast. Increase that by adding an extra teaspoon of yeast. So a tablespoon called for in the recipe plus 1 teaspoon extra of yeast, and see if that doesn't help. The next common question that we get is my loaf is very spongy looking and very crumbly when I go to slice it and eat it. It's not holding together. This might be because of the type of grain flour that you're using. A higher moisture grain like spelt or kamut, you may need to add a little extra flour than what's called for in the recipe. because of the extra moisture found in those grains. Also, you might want to, if you're using a hard red or a hard white, you may need to call your grain supplier, whoever that may be, and find out what the quality of that wheat is. Hard wheats, you want them to be a high protein, low moisture wheat to make a good quality yeast bread. So just contact your grain supplier and find out what the quality of that wheat is. If they come back and say, well, it was kind of a rainy growing season and so it's a little higher moisture than we typically like, that's okay. You can fix that problem by adding a little bit extra gluten to your recipe. You don't want to get too heavy-handed with the gluten or it'll mess up the fiber to flour ratio in your bread and you won't get the health benefits that you're trying to see with grinding your own wheat and making your own bread. So just a little bit extra. You also, if you're using a higher moisture content grain like spelt or kamut, or if it's a lower quality hard wheat, you might also need to increase your knead time by about 3 or 4 minutes. And so adding a little extra gluten or increasing your knead time should help with the crumbly, spongy looking bread. The next more recent question that we've been getting on the Zojirushi is that the top of the loaf is not browning as dark as, say, the picture on the outside of the box, or as dark as you may like it to. The biggest thing you have to remember with the Zojirushi is that it's a bread machine. It's not as foolproof as baking in your oven. It also has only a heating element on the bottom of the machine, whereas your standard oven in your kitchen has a heating element on the bottom as well as on the top, which is going to make the top of your loaf brown evenly. So just remember, you can use that crust control setting on dark if you want it a little bit darker, but just know that that's part of the nice thing and the convenient thing about having a bread machine is it may not turn out exactly as dark as you would normally like it, but at least you have the convenience of putting all of your ingredients in, pushing the button, and about 2.5 hours later coming back to a fully baked loaf of bread. If none of these are the problems that you're having with your bread machine, please don't hesitate to call us, or if you try these tips and your bread's still not turning out quite like you would like it, then please, you can contact us via our website. Our email is support@breadbeckers.com, and you're always welcome to call us here at the store, 770-516-5000, and we would be happy to help you in any way that we can.